You know, the great thing about our conversation is I think it shows new media at its very best. In that we're having a conversation, it's respectful, no one's trying to misrepresent. You know, things get a little bit passionate at times.
Yeah,
as they would.
Just like sex.
Yeah, exactly. Not the way I do it, mate. But all in all, I think this displays the very best in new media. People on different sides, good faith, having a disagreement, finding common ground in certain instances, disagreeing on others, but ultimately, well, the moment we walk away, we're going to be like, actually, you know what? That was brilliant. Yeah. We enjoyed it. I think everybody who watches or listens to it is going to have a blast. The issue comes with new media is that there is real issues, or I have real issues, and let's explore what you think in particular about this new medium where you have people interviewing certain people who have ideas that I personally think are dangerous, you know, Holocaust denial and whatever else. And look, you can bring whoever you want on your show. For instance, we've invited Nick Fuentes on the show. He hasn't responded. We'd love to have Nick on to have a full, robust conversation and actually challenge some of his views and some of the things he says, which I personally find despicable and highly dangerous. Where do you sit on that whole conversation and that whole debate?
Well, I certainly agree with what the first part of that, you know, and that I think there's also something where I just think like with the three of us, I think that's kind of just our personality. Mm-hmm. Anyway, it's like we're interested in these ideas, we want to talk about them, we want to debate them at some point, but I am just like, yeah, we go grab a beer after this and stuff. And part of that is just well, it's just kind of, what else are we going to do? I mean, like, what's the alternative to that? You know what I mean? Like, and anytime you're talking about a political issue, almost any time when you're talking about an important one, it is a matter of life and death or close to that. I mean, you know, if you're having a conversation with Bernie Sanders about healthcare, you know, from my perspective, Bernie Sanders' healthcare proposals is going to lead to like serious suffering and deaths and all. But man, I mean, what are we going to do? Just all go to war with each other always and all hate anyone? Particularly, also, like, I'm a Jewish guy who's very critical of Israel. So, like, you know, I got tons of family who have the exact opposite. What am I going to hate my family now? I got to hate my, you know, Democratic cousin or something like that? Like, it just seems crazy. And so I think, like, the only path forward is for us to have these conversations. And, you know, like, so to your point of, like, are there dangerous ideas? I mean, I think there's dangerous ideas all around us. And I think socialism's a dangerous idea.
Great.
I think fascism's a dangerous idea. I think, you know, wars of choice are a dangerous idea. But, right, we just got to be able to talk about these things. And I think that's one of the best things about the new media. And with Fuentes specifically, like in this case, and I've always been against all types of cancel culture, even when it's just like, you know, even if the government wasn't involved the way they were with the big tech companies, I'd still be against big tech companies kicking people off because, like, that just isn't good. It's not the right path. But with Fuentes specifically in this case, I think, as you guys know, part of the reason why you're saying you wanted him to come on the show, he's just gotten so huge that it's almost we're at a point where, like, we need to have this conversation. It makes absolutely no sense anymore for, like, you know, hearing Mark Levin call to cancel Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens and Nick Fuentes and kick them off social media, kick them out of these things, deplatform them all. It just kind of reminds me of like a couple of years ago when Brian Stelter was calling to cancel Joe Rogan. And you're just like, who are you? Who do you think you are in the rankings of this thing? Like, and I'm not saying like popularity makes you right, but popularity does make you relevant. It does make you a relevant part of the discussion. And I think that the best thing that could happen with Fuentes, the rise of Nick Fuentes, is that he does a bunch more of these shows. And I think there should be more debates, more conversations. But I would also say, I think with the same attitude that we have right now, we're just like, hey, let's talk about what we disagree with, but do it in a respect of like, let's talk about this like civilized men.
Look, I'm fully in agreement with you, Dave, where cancelling people, kicking people off platforms, it doesn't work. It drives ideas underground. It's only going to go to a platform where these ideas aren't going to be challenged. It's going to give them a certain amount of, you know, dangerousness, sexiness that they simply don't deserve. My issue comes with people when they interview the Nick Fuenteses of the world and they do not give an appropriate pushback on ideas. That's where I think it gets dangerous, because then you just have people saying their horrific ideas and you go, where's the pushback? Where's the challenge? Because if you don't push back on people's ideas, in my opinion, you're effectively endorsing them.
I don't agree with that. I just don't agree. I don't agree that if you don't push back on someone's ideas, you're endorsing it. I mean, I was talking about this the other day on some show, but the example that just came to my mind was this guy, Ben Burgess, who I like. He's a nice guy. He's a democratic socialist, and he wrote this book, and I believe the title of the book was called Canceling Comedians While the World Burns. And this was back like a few years ago, and it was like, I don't know, 2018, 2019. Or maybe it's around that time. But he was talking about how, like, you got all these left-wing activists and they're canceling Louis C.K. or they're going after this guy. Meanwhile, we still don't have universal health care, universal housing, or universal child care. I just thought that was a really interesting book and an interesting take that I kind of agreed with. And so I interviewed him. We just talked about the book and kind of talked about that. Now, I never pushed back or argued with him, but I don't think you can deduce from that like, therefore I'm endorsing democratic socialism.
His ideas are not that extreme, Dave.
Yeah, but
if you have a Holocaust denier who says Hitler was very cool on your show and you don't push back, that's a different thing.
I guess my point would be that I'm not so sure I agree with the idea that, like, being pro-socialist should be viewed as that far different from being pro-Nazi or something like that. Like, these are the great evil ideologies of the 20th century, and they're both responsible for a lot of horror and deaths and all of that. It's been very conventional thinking for a long time that communism is kind of misguided, but fascism is kind of evil. And I don't think any of us actually agree with everything about it.
You don't need to persuade me of that, but your example isn't quite fair. For example, we had, this will go out before the episode I'm about to mention, but we interviewed Hassan Piker, right? He basically says in the episode, he doesn't say it in terms, but he's like, I sort of say, well, people call you a communist, isn't that? And he's like, yeah, I've got no problem. Like, when we interviewed him, we pushed back on stuff he said, because communism is a horrific ideology. And we talked about our family's experiences and whatever. So my point is, comparing him to a kind of soft socialist who says, we shouldn't cancel comedians, we should focus on healthcare.
No, but he's not a soft socialist. I mean, he's a hardcore, like, I would consider him a communist. He literally argues that private businesses should be abolished and that it should all be, every business should be run democratically.
But does he admire Stalin? Does he say what we need is Stalin policies in America?
Probably not.
So that's the difference,
right?
Okay,
fair enough.
You, the Trigonometry audience, understand how vital free speech is. That's why we're proud to reintroduce you to our long-standing partners, Give, Send, Go. We caught up with their founders at Jordan Peterson's Alliance for Responsible Citizenship conference this year, and it was clear they are not just running a crowdfunding site, they're defending a principle. Take one of the most powerful examples, Daniel Penny. He stepped in during a dangerous subway incident in New York and was later charged with homicide. His Give, Send, Go campaign raised $3 million, allowing him to mount a strong legal defense as his case moves through the courts. That case made headlines, but the bigger story was this. While other platforms shut campaigns like his down, Give, Send, Go stood firm. So if you want to support causes that matter or raise funds yourself, whether it's for free speech, helping a friend in need, or disaster relief, visit GiveSendGo.com and use the code TRIGGER for a special 2.5% processing rate. That's GiveSendGo.com, the platform that doesn't just talk about free speech, it protects it.
But, so again, I'm not equating the things. I'm saying the logic of saying that when you don't push back, you are therefore endorsing, I think, is faulty logic. So that's the only
But it
point
depends on the
making.
extreme, is my point.
No, but I'm saying that logic still remains no matter how extreme the person is. If you have a conversation with somebody who has the worst views in the world and you just talked about cars and you agreed on that, it doesn't therefore logically follow that you agreed with the other stuff.
Yes, but what if you had someone on your show who says we should kill black people? Or, black people are genetically inferior and therefore we should structure society in such a way that, they get mistreated. Or whatever. Or, someone who says, who encourages his followers to say, I will kill, rape, and die in my name, as Nick does.
Is this, are we talking Fuentes here?
Yeah.
I missed that one.
Oh, you didn't see that one? And then you have that person on and you don't talk about any of this, right?
Well,
That's kind of a problem, isn't it?
Well, I mean, the thing about it, okay, there's a couple things here. First of all, it's a unique situation, like the Tucker having Nick Fuentes on, and I also had Nick on a couple weeks before.
That's why we're talking to you
was a
about
big deal until Tucker had him on, and now no one cares about that anymore. Tucker eclipsed me again. But like, look, it's a situational, and there's certain dynamics that are going on here now. So like, I do think there's this weird. There's to me, a little bit of a disconnect between what that interview actually was and the way that a lot of people are perceiving it, where they're saying that, like, okay, yes, it's true that Tucker, or myself for that matter, didn't go, hey, we've got you here. I think you're a terrible person, and here are all the awful things that you've said, and I want to fight with you for 3 hours about all these awful things you've said here. But I also think that Nick Fuentes is a unique thing. You know, he came up in the dark, like his whole brand is that he's saying the most, you know, toxic things. And he's intentionally, obviously, I mean, if you ever watch the kid, he's doing a right-wing shock jock thing. Like, there's a lot of humor involved in it, there's a lot of trolling involved in it, and there's a lot of kind of like getting off on I'm saying the wildest, edgiest thing. And in that environment, no, I actually don't think it's good. Well, let me just finish this.
Okay, sure.
In that environment, I don't think the right move is to like go like, I'm appalled by what you said. To me, at least, it seemed more like the right move was to go like, all right, hey, let's talk about this. Like, look, do we actually believe this? You know, and what was interesting to me is when he talked to me, at least, I know he did condemn racial hatred. He was like, yes, we shouldn't hate people just because of the race that they are. I brought up the Holocaust and I was like, you seem to be implying pretty heavily here that you don't think this happened. So let's argue about this because I'm pretty darn sure it happened. And he really just kind of conceded. He was like, yeah, I think it might be exaggerated. I was like, I don't really think it is because like, look at these numbers and look at this. And he kind of conceded that. On Tucker's show, Tucker literally said to him that it is, listen, he goes, we are Christians and it is against my religion to hate a group of people based on being in that group. And again, he did kind of seem to concede that. Now, I don't know. Does this mean that Nick is moderating his views? Does it mean that he's trying to pull the wool over everybody's eyes and he still believes all of that stuff? Is he maybe a 26-year-old kid who kind of doesn't himself know whether he made a name for himself as being the edgiest, most shocking guy. Now he's become ultra huge. Now Charlie Kirk gets murdered in front of all of us. And I don't think it would be the worst thing in the world if he was moderating his views and wanted to get a little bit better. And so while I agree with you on this, I think there should be more debates. I think Ben Shapiro should debate Nick Fuentes, honestly. I think there should be big debates that happen. But I didn't think, also in the Tucker thing and with me too, in the context of it, they had been feuding. I mean, Nick had been attacking me a little while ago. And then with Tucker and him, I mean, they were like in a white hot feud where Tucker also took a swipe at him and kind of took a swing and missed by calling him a Fed without really being able to back that up or whatever, which is in this business like almost like the worst thing you could call someone. And so I don't know, it was like a standoff in a weird way. And I don't know, I don't think that's bad. I still err on the side of
We're not saying it's bad.
Sure. We're not saying it's bad. So come back to, so I guess when you were saying like attacking someone and going, I'm outraged, I'm disgusted, I agree. I think that's all performative nonsense.
Yeah.
And we've been accused of, going soft on people and not showing appropriate levels of outrage. When we interview a mainstream politician like Nigel Farage, I find it childish, I'm going to be honest with you, and performative. But what I do think it's a responsibility of anyone sitting in the chair is, if this person is saying outrageous things, is for you to get to the bottom of it. Does he genuinely believe it? Is he being like a kind of comedic edgelord? Is he saying it purely in a cynical way just to get money, clicks, and attention? Is it a combination of all three? Or is he just a kid who's just somehow found himself after, starting off in his mum's basement to use a hack concept of, the internet, and all of a sudden he's got this kind of huge global audience? What is it? That is the responsibility of the interviewer. And also as well, when Nick says the words, Jews are not assimilable in society, and Tucker just lets that go, we've got to be honest, Dave. We really...
I love Stalin and lets that go.
Well, he said we'll come back to that, and
but
then
he
they
did.
never... But also, like, that happens sometimes, as you guys know, in interviews. Like,
that would never happen with us.
Okay, fine. But things happen where you're like, oh, I wanted to get to this point. I wanted to debate this too. I guarantee in this interview right now, there's views I have that you guys both think are wrong that we don't get to on this show.
But yeah, look, I don't agree with you that broccoli is brilliant, if that's what you believe. But if you said I love Stalin, we might come back to it.
Fair enough. But
especially if you are the voice of conservative America. And someone comes on your show and says they love the greatest mass murderer in the ideology of your opposition, communism, in history. Yeah.
Mao got him.
Yeah, true, Mao.
I'm just saying, people are always leaving the goat out of the conversation. It's just not fair.
I have some dispute about, how much of that was intentional and how much of that was not.
But then there's a whole other argument of, does that even really matter at a certain point? But
I think your correction is true. The second greatest. I'm Russian, so I'm a bit biased towards it.
Fair enough.
So trying to build up the numbers, right? Those jokes could go out of context and wrong. That's a different category. And if I was the voice of conservative America and someone praised Hitler and then came on my show and also praised Stalin, I think I might be like, what?
Sure. And isn't it reasonable to say that, like, okay, I understand there's going to be people who praise Hitler and people who praise Stalin, but you can't praise both, man. Like, you got to be good. You got to be good on the other one. I'm just saying, if someone loves Adolf Hitler, the one thing I can count on is that they're good on hating Joseph Stalin, and vice versa. So anyway, there's that.
So that gets into the question.
But I think, like, look, this is how I feel, kind of more broadly about the thing with Nick Fuentes himself, right? And I don't know him super well, but we hung out a little bit after we did the show, and I don't. Look, I feel like, and I think I've seen you yourself talk about this, and maybe even, I can't remember the exact thing you said, but you might have even said that it was the most dangerous part of wokeism on the left. And I certainly know I've been on record predicting this, Jordan Peterson, and all these people have said for so many years. Like, our whole thing to the woke left was, you'd go, now I don't know if I would quite put it as the worst part of it, but you'd be like, you be careful. You have no idea what you're stirring up here.
100%.
And essentially, now there's many things going on. That's one of the dynamics, but that's a big part of it, right?
Sure.
So now we see that emerging. We see that reaction emerging. I think
but you on white men long enough, they're going to go, well, okay, we're white and we're men and f you.
Yeah, that's right. And it's the natural response that I think young people in general would have. So my thing is that there's a whole young audience of people who listen to this guy. And I don't wish to berate them with like, I want to open up the conversation and allow them to see that, like, there is legitimacy to their grievances, but there is also a very dark path that they can go down with those grievances, right? So, like, that's a big part of it. And then the other thing is, like, I do think we kind of, like I said this when I was interviewing Nick, where, which I know guys our age, we've all had this thought before, where we're like, thank God there wasn't all of this stuff around when I was a kid. Yeah. Because my God, and I remember one of the examples that I really thought, and I wasn't like the toughest kid, but we were like a little group of hooligans. We probably thought we were tougher than we actually were. But I remember when Sandman, Nicholas Sandman, I believe was his name, the Catholic kid.
Sandman,
who was just smiling at the Native American.
Yeah.
And then when the full video came out, you were like, I mean, he actually could not have handled it better.
Right.
You would be so proud of your kid if your kid was in that situation and handled it that way. But I remember thinking, like, what would me and my group of friends have said when the black Israelites came over and they started going to these kids and they go, you're a bunch of rapists and colonizers and you ruined this and I mean, me and my friends, dude, when I was 19 or whatever, we would have been like, that's right, bitch, that's why you got raped. I mean, we would have said the most hard, just because that's how we were as little kids. And so anyway, I guess my point is just, now we have young people who have essentially grown up online. And it's like, I would like there to be room for someone, even who has had the worst takes ever, to, like, not be buried by what they said at 22. And then one quick point, and I swear I'll make this real quick. I also think that, like, as I watched this, this whatever the event that all the Mark Levin and Lindsey Graham and all these guys, it was like the Jewish Republican thing through an event. But I listened to, like, Mark Levin, and it seems to me like he's doing Nick Fuentes too. It's almost the same thing. It's like Mark Levin is, like, discussing ideas. He's going, listen, you little cockroach, you think you're gonna come through me? I'll squash you like a bug, you Nazi scum. And you're like, you're basically doing the same thing, dude. Like, you're just doing it from a different angle. All types of calls for flattening Gaza. It's like, I don't know, man. I don't like that stuff on any side, but it does seem to be that, like.
But I think this is the point, though, Dave, is I think if you had Mark Levin on your show, you'd have a very different style of conversation with him as you did with Nick. And
agreed.
Right? And this is the same thing. And by the way, I think it's very important to say, we are not saying that if you have someone on your show, you've got to berate them. We haven't berated you. We haven't berated Bassem Youssef. We haven't berated Norman Finkelstein. We haven't berated, we didn't berate Hassan Piker. We don't berate people with whom we disagree. But what's interesting about this, and I'm not calling for anyone to do that, and Tucker and you and anyone else can have anyone they want on their show and should, right, if they choose to. But the difference is, when Tucker has Ted Cruz on, he goes hard in the paint. Ted Cruz is a state senator in this country, which is one of the reasons that you go hard at him, right? But on the other hand, this is a guy who's, he's a serious guy. On the other hand, he has Nick Fuentes on, who says, I love Stalin, and he doesn't push back on him at all. And this is where people see the discrepancy, right?
But I just think this is a very weak comparison. I mean, listen, to have a sitting U.S. senator on your show who's calling for regime change war in Iran, which is what the whole fight was over. Sure. That is just a very different thing than talking to a 26-year-old streamer.
But you can't have both, Dave. You can't say he's just a 26-year-old streamer while saying he's got a massive audience.
Because he is. He's both of those things. He's a 26-year-old
but you're saying it to diminish
audience.
his stature in the comparison.
No, I'm just describing what he is. That is different than a sitting U.S. senator calling for a regime change war.
He, like us, is someone who influences a lot of people.
Sure.
With that influence comes a level of scrutiny that's appropriate, right? He's not someone who's inconsequential, and he's someone who's saying things like, I love Hitler, I love Stalin.
Okay, but that is different than a sitting senator who's advocating for a war. It's just different. Also, I will say, as you know with these things, right? And like, Tucker kind of said this when he was on my show recently, but like with all of these, like this conversation right now, right, where we're disagreeing about stuff, but we're doing it in a civil tone. But all of us have the option to shift that gear.
Yeah.
Like I could make this a confrontational interview, or you could make this or you could make there's a dance to that. And if you actually go watch the Ted Cruz thing, it kind of starts pretty civil, and I think Cruz was the one who kind of like escalated it to being like more confrontational. But Fuentes could have done that, but he didn't. Or Tucker could have done that with Nick, and he didn't. So, but again, I just think that like all these things are situationals. It's different. Obviously there is, I guess, and maybe this is part of my own bias, but yes, if you're somebody, say like Mark Levin, who has been one of the biggest right-wing, talk show hosts for my entire life, probably less relevant now than then, but there was a time when he was like in the big three. It was probably like Limbaugh, Hannity, and I think he was pretty close to them, who's been advocated for like several wars that have been absolutely catastrophic, who's now advocating for more. Yeah, I have a different tone with that than I do with something that I perceive to be more edgelord streaming. So you don't think Nick likes Hitler? Or you don't think he likes Stalin? Honestly, I don't know. I just don't know.
Did you ask him?
I think, yeah, I mean, I'm not going to publicly say what we said privately, but like I'm actually not sure he likes me too much, to be honest. But
you are Jewish.
Yeah, well, that's right. Well, I don't think that's his issue. I got the impression that he was feeling the weight of the moment. Of Charlie Kirk getting killed. And I actually thought his stream after that, which I publicly gave him credit for.
The initial one
after that, I was like, I did just appreciate anyone who had that tone, and particularly this guy, as the biggest leader of the biggest, farthest to the right, constituents. Like, that's good to be calling for de-escalation and Christianity. Like, I thought that was really good. I got the impression that, and I don't want to say what he views, but I got the impression that he was a person who was thinking about the weight of the moment that he was in, thinking about all of that, and also having painted himself and been painted by others into this corner. And I kind of felt like, let's like leave a door open and maybe he'll move a little bit to being not as bad. That being said, I don't know that that's going to happen. I think it's quite possible that that won't be the case. But
do you think he's a Nazi?
I don't know. I don't know what that means exactly. Is he a Nazi? He's said favorable things about the Nazis. He seems to believe in some type of like Catholic theocracy or something like that. I don't know. I don't think. I think that to me, it's like the Nazi thing is, it's devil worshipping of today. You know what I mean? It's like that. It's the most outrageous thing that you can say. It's the biggest taboo. And so I think there's something about like, I don't know. In the same way that like when you'd see almost like a goth kid whose like dad isn't around and who hates her. Is he really a goth? Or it's like, I don't know. He's
Well,
rebelling.
he is in that moment.
Yeah, sure. Well, he's rebelling, and I think Nick has been on record like I think there's a clear decision to go, if this is the thing that's off limits, if this is the button I'm not allowed to push, I will be pushing that as hard as I possibly can.